Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome back to part two of our NeuroPoints training. So we've got a few more people that will be trickling in, so I'm going to be admitting them as I welcome you all, but we're going to be very mindful of time because yesterday we really took it right down to the wire. So we want to make sure to get everything taken care of and addressed that we want to address during the course of today's training. So we want to say thank you for being part of the training yesterday. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your thought. Thank you for your questions. And also thank you for your feedback. If you took the time to complete the feedback form, we really appreciate it. We reviewed it yesterday, and Don has made adjustments based on your feedback already. So one thing for sure is there will be more time in the breakout rooms. That was something that several people commented on. So we're looking forward to that. All right, it looks like several more people are joining us now, but Don, I think we can go ahead and advance the slide and
Yes, we are.
awesome.
Catch up. All right, it looks like the technology is catching up to me,
That's
so
is okay.
go here.
Well, today at the end, I'm going to go ahead again and put a feedback form in the chat. I'll do it sooner than I did yesterday, just to make sure that everybody has that. And I'll do a follow-up as I did last time, just to make sure everyone has an opportunity to provide us with feedback. So again, today is session 2, and then we'll be returning again on September 24th for the third and final installment of this training session with you. Our first official NeuroPoints training, and you are our first cohort. All right, Don, it's the three of us again. So you've got us again. You've got Don, David, and myself here facilitating, and Jared behind the scenes helping to support us with technical aspects of this training as well.
All right, so I am going to jump right in. Thank you guys for coming back. We are so excited to be continuing this journey with you. I know that there is a lot on your plate right now, and many of you are already in the throes of teaching and getting school back up and going again, or doing some trainings. So we thank you for being here and taking the time. So we're all just going to take a breath for a moment, kind of let all of that wash over us. And think about if you had one day free from all of your daily responsibilities, what would you choose to do? Where would you go, or what would you do with one free day? No responsibilities, no cell phone to answer, no work piling up. So if you'll take a moment and pop that in the chat, I'm going to put mine in there too. Oh, I see some similarities already. Some of us are wanting to be outside. David says, off to the beach. Mario, the beach, Costa Rica. Oh, we've got a lot of beach goers. Oh, hide in my room and read a book. That sounds wonderful too. All right, we'll take a look at where ourselves would love to be as we're bringing ourselves back together. We're going to touch back on that. It sounds like we all have kind of something in mind that we would love to do with that free day of responsibilities to take care of ourselves. So our resources, just as a reminder, you have the ebook to the visual tools. Hopefully you were able to access the e-guide, the training guide yesterday. That link was sent to you. So if you're having any trouble at all, just put a note in the chat and we will reach out to you to make sure you can access that. And then I did check today to make sure that our Padlet is working. So diving right in, welcome back. We are going to address some new learning outcomes today. We're going to talk about navigating the route to knowledge and guiding learners along their unique path using NeuroPoints. And then we're also going to talk about your curriculum and your standards, and how do you create an entry point for students when you have a destination in mind of where they need to go. As just a quick reminder, if you will make sure that your video is on and take a moment to mute that microphone, we will have lots of opportunities to interact, so we will be unmuting today as well. Appreciate the opportunity to learn together, and we will have more time in breakout rooms. That was a big feedback from yesterday that we want to make sure to emphasize today. And of course, take what you need, take your breaks, and stay hydrated to take care of yourself. So again, our learning outcomes for today, we're going to start with establishing strong starting points that foster inquiry and depth. We're going to get into identifying opportunities for implementation with your current curriculum resources. And then how do we unlock student intelligence and talk a little bit more about deeper learning, metacognition, and then that role of AI. So in reviewing from yesterday, I know it was fast and furious. This is an example of our thinking about the apple, or about my thinking about the apple. And when you're looking at it at first glance, your eyes might be drawn to a particular part of my code, particular color of the code, depending on your interest in wanting to learn more about my thinking. Some of us look at it holistically. So I thought it would be really valuable if we had a chance to kind of slow it down in slow motion and see what would this look like as I was building it. So we're going to have a peek inside my brain for just a moment. We have a video that should pop up for you. Let's see. Are you guys able to see it? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. All right. Okay, so my screen looks a little different. Kevin, can you give me a thumbs up when we're back? Okay, awesome. So as you kind of saw that thinking build, I just wanted to emphasize again that when we're thinking about content or concept or topic, we can start with that blank slate. We can start anywhere. And in this particular case, we started with change points. If you see the dark line around apples there, around the green point in the middle, that was one place that we started. And in this particular model, we connected everything back to apples. Okay, so we're just going to experiment a little bit today and think about, how is this going to look for me as a learner? What does it look like for me as I'm starting to use NeuroPoints in my own thinking? So we have a little challenge for you that you'll be able to do with your breakout teams, is how would you plan for your responsibility-free day? So what would that look like using NeuroPoints to plan out, where would you go? What would you do? How would you get there? All of those great questions that you ask before you have that free time for yourself. And so in your breakout rooms, you guys will have some opportunities to visit with each other. We've set up 15 minutes for this breakout. So it just gives you an opportunity to talk to each other about the neurocode patterns, or the NeuroPoints patterns as you're building your neurocode. It gives you a chance to ask questions. And then together you can either come up with one idea that you would like to plan for, or you can each create your own, which I think is even more valuable, so that you can kind of compare ideas with each other. So you'll have 15 minutes to share ideas and discuss your process. And then when we come back, we're going to just ask for a few people to share out some ideas. And of course, while you're in your breakout rooms, if you want to toggle to your ebook, you certainly can, but you definitely can just count on each other to help each other out. So what else do you need to know before we move to breakout rooms? And you can come off mute if there's a question or anything I missed.
Could you just remind us one more time where we locate the ebook?
Yes, there was a link. Kevin, can you kind of talk to that real quickly? Or put it in the chat?
That
Yes.
that would be the guide, right? That we'd want to reference, not the ebook specifically.
So-
The link is now in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you. So
Thank
that'll take you to our training
Thank you.
guide. Thank you guys for helping with that. All right, well, we're going to let you get into your breakout rooms. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There's nothing in my training doc. I'm signed in. There's no file. And I just want to be clear, what the question. You want us to discuss how the narrow points are?
Yes, thank you for that. So just talking about your first post that you put in the chat, where would you go or what would you do if you had a responsibility-free day? And so as you're in your breakout rooms, think about how you would plan for that and how maybe you could use NeuroPoints to show you're thinking about that. What would that look like for you? Does that help a little bit?
And that would mean making change points for a sequence, or what are the different types of things you might do, which is group points, or, if you went to the beach, even what are all the things, all of the objects that you're going to have in your beach bag. So it's a matter of just playing with the idea of neuropoints and these different cognitive processes and thinking about that.
Love that. All right, let's pop into our rooms. Kevin, if you'll press that magic button, and just gives you guys a chance to chat a little bit more about that. All right, looks like we're coming back together.
You know, they got to give us a warning about getting yanked back, man. That's just rough.
Oh no, it didn't give you a countdown.
No, it just said you're going back.
Ah, that is so rude.
Yeah, I know. And it's like we were right in the middle of making our points for the red. We were creating our day off.
Nice, you guys were on it. Well, I love that. And I'm sorry that that beginning was a little bit bumpy. It reminded me of the time of the first time I tried to make a cake. You know, I told you yesterday my grandmother was a baker. And the first time I tried to make one, I used baking soda instead of baking powder.
Oh, yeah, I did that too. I didn't think there was a difference.
I
There
didn't
is.
either, but apparently it makes it hard as a rock. It doesn't rise. But if you ice it and give it to your parents anyway, they will eat it. Just so you know.
They love it.
They were very sweet. I think I was 12 at the time. But anyway, thank you guys for that time that you had with your partners in your breakout room. I know it was brief. And we
Can I ask a quick question? I'm sorry to interrupt.
yes.
So I was trying to share in the chat. I was trying to upload or an attachment in the chat, and I wasn't able to, but maybe if you could pop it on the screen. Do you have just the 5 colors? I had taken a screenshot and then emailed it to myself and was trying to attach it into our chat just so we were all working with all 5 of the colors and we didn't have to keep referencing to the side. Yes. So do you have just the breakdown how green change points is go, red part points is stop, purple character points are the character point, brown group points, blue viewpoints, and kind of, do you have that on a document so somebody could just take a quick picture of it so then they don't need to
Yeah.
I'll post it in the chat.
So I have it right here and I was trying to post it in the chat, but then we got sucked out. We did have a countdown. So I was like, oh my gosh, I have like 10 seconds. Hold on, I'm going to get it.
How did you get 10 seconds? I had nothing.
Yeah,
Carrie, you were on it though. You were totally on it, Carrie. You just said your fluency. You just got 5 stars.
Yeah,
Um,
I love it. Well,
and
thank you
in the
for that.
Really?
I think we've got it in the chat now, I think, from yesterday's slide deck. Go ahead. I interrupted somebody. Go ahead.
No, I'm just trying to say, there is still nothing posted in the NeuroPoints thing. Will there be something posted there?
Yes,
'Cause
Jen, it is there. I just had to sign out and log back
Yeah.
in.
Log out and log in,
sign
Jen.
out and sign back in? Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. Thank you, Jared, for helping us out with those screenshots. Okay, so we just jumped right in, kind of like I did with baking that cake. I forgot part of the recipe. So let's just talk a little bit about how you did with this brief moment in time. As we're looking at now the apple example we had, of course, we did have our character points were in the purple. That's the heart, thinking about describing traits and characteristics. Our red part points, of course, looking at the anatomy of a physical object. The green for go, those change points, which could also be a cycle. It could be cause and effect. It could be a sequence. And then group points, where we're really looking at separating, sorting, categorizing, classifying. And then viewpoints, which really play in very well to all of our thinking. Why are we thinking about this? What is our point of reference or our point of view? So that was kind of our quick bird's eye view. So as you were experimenting with that in your breakout rooms, did anyone have a neuropoint pattern that they immediately thought of first that kind of helped to guide the direction of your thinking? And you can unmute if you'd like to share. Maybe somebody from room 4.
I'm not room 4, but
Yes, please.
what I did was I actually went to red because my frame for it was my perfect free day looks like, and then I kind of broke it into morning, afternoon, and evening. So to me, that kind of like helped break it down, and then that led me to green in terms of plotting the day out, in terms of, okay, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to have some coffee and read and head for a hike. So the red and green kind of worked well together for me, like looking at the parts and how I'd break it down, and then again sequencing it out with green. But Alicia in our group had a great one. She had a great idea as well, that she did hers in pencil and then highlighted with colored pencil, because I have the fat markers and was getting stressed out and trying to fitting it all on one page.
I understand. Yes, I've struggled with which markers I choose to use as well. And the colors really do help. I agree with you about that, to help you see where your thinking is starting. So I love that you shared that. Thank you. Did anything surprise you as you were talking in your breakout rooms? Was there a pattern that maybe you hadn't thought about, or you had questions about using? Or maybe did someone else's perspective help you expand your thinking?
So I'm not sure what group we were. I didn't.
I don't know what group I was in.
Thanks. Go ahead. Go ahead, Carrie or Jennifer.
So I was just going to say, our group, we kind of, we started out a little kind of ripping apart kind of differences between thinking maps and neuro points, and kind of how one builds off the other, and how we're new on this journey. So we were just going to kind of dive in as like newbies. And it's interesting after Teresa shared, because I kind of started with blue and then purple, and then I went to sequence it with the and then I went to the change point with the green. So but as we discussed in our group, my thinking kind of built off of, I had a little exposure already because I was used to thinking maps, where there are a few people in our group that didn't have that exposure. So this information, without having the guidebook and book ahead of time prior to the training, created a little bit of challenge. But then we also discussed how kind of like learning as students, like they don't always come in with some of the background information, and kind of learning together on this journey. Even yesterday, walking through with the apple example and then the pencil example. So we were going to kind of, take some healthy risks and jump right into it. So I think we kind of supported each other in that way in our group.
Oh, I love that. And that is, it's a hard place for us to be as teachers, to be in that uncomfortable zone where, we're trying something new, but we're not quite sure. And it is a good reminder, as Carrie said, of how our kids feel when we're introducing new topics or concepts, and they don't have the the schema necessarily for what they need. So I just wanted to bring us back again to thinking about why we're doing this and why having mirror points as a visual language is so important. And we're already seeing that it's helping us even become more flexible in our thinking. It's helping us to collaborate as builders of knowledge. It's helping us to think a little bit more about how we think, that metacognition. And it slows us down for that moment in time of thinking about why is this important to me? So what I thought I would share with you is, based on our feedback yesterday, is some examples. I'm going to pull up my document camera and stop the share for a moment. Is
Let me jump in while you're doing that, Dawn, and just say, you know, what Carrie just displayed. When a student says, "Oh, I'm going to use change points. I'm going to go with green. I'm going to go into character points. Oh yeah, they're purple." It's a metacognitive act, right? They're thinking, how am I going to think about it, rather than just sort of what I'm going to think. So each one of these, and then together, immediately puts the whole classroom into that place of saying, hey, we really are thinking about how we want to think about it, and that is just tremendously rich ability that then they can take anywhere in their life, which is, to me, the ultimate of it.
I love that. So kind of jumping off of that, you know, we started with that blank slate and a question. And so I wanted to model for you, just real quickly, a few examples of what that might look like, because yesterday we mentioned that it could be messy. You know, learning and thinking is messy, and it does involve taking risks and trying things that may or may not work or making mistakes. So what does that look like now from a student's perspective? And then how can we guide them as teachers? So how does studying animals help us understand ourselves might be the overarching goal of a unit. And so if I were working with students on this particular topic, and I had a student that created a code, at first glance, I'm going to see there's a lot going on here. And as you mentioned, or maybe discovered in your breakout rooms, you were maybe drawn to one of the patterns instinctively. So for me, I typically think about change and change points, and think about, you know, how does something change over time? What is influencing that change? So when I'm looking at this particular student's work, I might be drawn immediately up here to where I see that they've got some change points coming off of a shark. And so if I'm looking to see how this student is thinking about sharks, I can already see that they've got some descriptors there. They hunt, they fast, they live in the ocean, I suppose. But then we've got to tax people. So that is a very specific viewpoint. And if you notice here, the green change points, the student is saying they sense their prey, they swim silently, they think people are prey. And then we've got the little person that possibly is attacked by a shark. So for this student, this viewpoint is really important to them. And so then I'm kind of following now. They've drawn a viewpoint down here to hawk, which is also a hunter. So we've got some commonalities there. And I'm noticing that they also did some part points of a hawk. And somebody asked yesterday, well, what about misconceptions? What about students who are making those misconceptions? Well, this student originally described the hawk in the parts of having a beak, feathers, and claws. And I'm noticing that when I look at part points over here for the lion, see if I can zoom in on that a little bit. They also had claws. But as the student was doing some more investigating, and maybe as they researched and used their resources, they came back and there's a viewpoint now of talons, where claws became talons. So as a teacher, I can see very quickly where the student is growing in their thinking. I can look and see that as far as group points goes, we've got some beginning understandings. They've separated into living on land and living on water. And then I see where they've started processing that a little bit more. So as a teacher, very quickly, just by looking at the colors alone, I can see where the student's thinking was going. And as I'm following along, it gives me an opportunity to ask them questions along the way. So what does that look like in a different content area? So if that were science, as an example, what if we're reading a novel? How do character traits impact our choices? That could be the inquiry point where we're starting with a novel this time instead of a science content. What would that look like? Did that focus better for you? Okay, so when you're looking at this particular student's code, and somebody can come off mic or put it in the chat, what stands out to you right away? Are we seeing all of the patterns here? Because that was one of the things I noticed first. I was like, okay, so when they were doing their coding, they really focused in on character points. And they really talked about the character Opal and the dog Winn-Dixie in this particular case. And they spent a lot of time looking at how to describe those two characters. And then I see some change points for Opal coming in. And it looks like we're seeing some causality here. So the student here is starting to make some inferences about how the character traits are affecting what the character is doing. Now, this could be a good opportunity to talk about, well, how does setting play into this? Because we have the word lonely there. How does that play into it? Maybe we could use part points to examine the setting now. And as we're developing more information about other characters, we might bring in group points at that moment. And so this gives you kind of a stepping off point. So let's look at one more. If we're switching to math as an example, and we're looking at equivalency, maybe a question that comes up during discussion, students want to know, well, why are we using different forms to represent the same value? And so that's a great question to throw them, back to them and put them in some groups and say, okay, let's think about that. What are some different ways that we can think about value? We can think about value as money, and value as in baking, like with my example of using too much of the baking soda. We can talk about the different ways that we can change the form of a number from a decimal to a percent to a fraction. And I can see very quickly that the student has some understanding of 0.25 is 25%. That's equivalent to 25 over 100. That's equivalent to 1/4, which is 25 cents again, and it's a gumball. So I can see there's some understanding, but I don't yet know, does the student understand how to move from one to the other? So that again would give me an opportunity to ask some questions. So that leads us to thinking about our first objective. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, switch back over. There we go. So with our first learning objective today, we are already experiencing this already. We're starting to think about our thinking and inquiry and depth of understanding. And that kind of brings us to our discussion yesterday, where we were talking about engagement. And we brought up in the chat yesterday some barriers to engagement. So I'd like you to find something to jot down to, maybe a sticky note or on a blank sheet of paper. How does inquiry lead to engagement, or does it? Can we prove or disprove that? Does engagement come before inquiry, or does inquiry come before engagement? Kind of that chicken and the egg thinking on that. I'll give you a moment to jot down some ideas. So we're going to go back to our breakout rooms. You'll be with the same people that you were just with. And we're going to give you guys about 10 minutes to think about what is the role of inquiry and engagement Is there one that happens before the other? And then how does using NeuroPoints to help students focus on their thinking and their metacognition, how does it support inquiry or how does it support engagement? Okay, so we're going to have 10 minutes in our rooms this time. And we just want to think about, what is your viewpoint on this? What is your viewpoint? Where do you start thinking about inquiry and engagement? Okay, so I'll let Kevin do his magic button. Got it. Awesome. We'll pop you back in.
I've got to. Dale, which room? Dale, which room were you in? Do you recall?
I was with Carrie Folks. Carrie, the GT teacher.
Carrie, yes, I'll get you back in.
Uh-oh, from
You're
Bridgeport.
in room
Hey,
one.
good morning, Dale.
Hi, good morning. It's getting clearer. it's unfolding like the neural point. I mean, like
You gotta love that side of it, huh? It just sort of comes in waves. Speaking of the
You know,
beach and
it's-
Hawaii.
yeah. It's so hard. I'm so tethered to the thinking maps thinking. So this is I'm trying to, be open-minded to be, see how we could expand.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things, and for me, it was a breakthrough when I was first developing it, was the idea that in our brain, there are all these interdependencies and nodes connecting and everything. And the more I keep them isolated, the less depth and inquiry and less rich comprehension. So the idea is basically taking many of the same cognitive processes
Right.
of thinking maps and then showing students, oh, you can really integrate these together. They're not separate maps. Like if you took, I've never thought of this analogy, but if you looked at the United States map and then you just pulled out a map of each state and had it separate, you wouldn't show all the interconnections between all the states and the long, beautiful ride to Hawaii. You wouldn't see all of that, right? If you just had separate maps. So that's another. I keep seeking. I keep trying to find the perfect analogy to what it means to have that kind of orchestration of thinking, and students being empowered in that way. So keep struggling.
No, but see, I think part of it is the frame of reference to me was the most powerful, well, one of the most powerful components of thinking maps. So I was probably not the best thinking maps fidelity user. So I tended to integrate the different thought processes. And I remember hearing it's not about the map, it's meaning from the map.
Mhm.
So I feel like that's NeuroPoints. It's like, how do you create, not just meaning, but inquiry? I feel like that's a difference.
Absolutely. I think you're right it's right where Dawn is going right now with the whole question of inquiry and engagement. And, we often think about emotional intelligence as, sort of purely emotional states, but all the research shows it's also about meaning making. And that connects to engagement. So we want to create the social, emotional, sort of cultural environment in the classroom to support open-mindedness and empathy. And then it's about meaning making. I mean, mostly we're asking students in classrooms to make meaning, how well they do that and how well they integrate the ideas together. So that is, I mean, I think and the frame, we have the frame within the NeuroPoints model, and it's certainly going to be a key component of the software. But that is key. And then viewpoints actually gives even greater dimension to it because it's spread across the whole canvas. Remember when you have the circle map, all of that contextual information is bounded with viewpoints. I've never really, thank you for this conversation, by the way. So with viewpoints, it's like it's distributed across the whole canvas. And then you have frames for each one of those points and then the broader frame like with thinking maps. So I never even thought about that going this why the viewpoints is so richly distributed and associative, and then the framing that goes with it.
Yeah, and I like that it becomes very personalized. And I think the engagement piece becomes so powerful this by using NeuroPoints. I can see it. I can see it. I'm not great at it yet, but I can see
Hey,
it.
day at a time, right, Dale? Come on, day at a time.
I can see the practicality. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't beat yourself up. Day at a time.
Well, thanks for this bonus content.
We have
Yeah.
a bonus breakout room.
You were
right
in
there.
our group. Somehow you got in there. How'd you do that?
Okay, we got the warning in that time. Okay. Whew. I often say technology hates me, so sometimes it works for me and sometimes it doesn't.
Hey, Don, can I jump in really quick? I
Mhm.
just want to say for everybody on here that we already decided where session 3 is going to be held. It's going to be held with Dale in Hawaii.
Oh,
Just so you know, unfortunately, we're gonna have to rough it out and head out there. And
I love it. I love it.
First thing, we go to the beach and then we get together.
I have a couple
the
of
beach.
timeshares in Hawaii.
That definitely works. All right. Well, thank you guys for coming back. We were talking a little bit before we jumped in there about where is the relationship between inquiry and engagement. And so you guys had some opportunities to think through that. I'd love somebody to come off mic and tell us, what are your thoughts? Is it the chicken and the egg? Does engagement come before inquiry? Does inquiry come before engagement? Kind of walk us through your thinking.
So our group, we talked about meeting your students where you're at. Meet the student, whether they're at inquiry or engagement, and go from there in that cycle. So we talked a lot in our group about, we talked about the different maps. We talked in my group, Alicia is high school. My classroom experience was 3rd grade. How sad it is that as kids get older, and like I have a 13-year-old and a 19-year-old, and I'm watching that 13-year-old get to that point where the why is going away, right? That curiosity and wonder of the world around you, and how we need to bring that back. Just because my viewpoint is testing is beating that out of children, but we talked about just the cyclical nature of it and just the importance of meet those kids where they are. So if you have those kids where they're engaged in a topic for whatever reason, because it was the lesson, or maybe they're curious and there's that inquiry stage because they saw something on their way to school or they experienced something at home or something that's happening, meet them where they are, but keep the cycle going.
Hey, thank you for sharing. Would somebody like to add to that or go in a different?
So I was with Mary and Mario, and there is definitely an interconnect between engagement and inquiry. And I teach high school physics, so right away I went into, okay, inquiry, here's the engineering design process versus the scientific method. What are the different components of that? How does that tie back to student engagement? For example, if you're like brainstorming, that would be a good illustration of whether the students are engaged or not. Sharing of results. I think we are getting a hang of it. So anytime a question comes into mind, we are putting it as a viewpoint, like, what was that? So where am I? Oh, I'm lost. Here. Okay, so sharing results, it could apply to both engagement and inquiry. So it's evolving is how I see it. And then for the character points, like what would an engaged student looks like? That was how we viewed it. So like taking notes, collaborating, versus in inquiry, we are questioning, we are challenging, we are researching to prove, disprove what we have on the table, that kind of stuff.
That is amazing. And that just, again, I get so excited because as you're talking, I'm visualizing what your code might look like. You know, when you're talking about, we added some new viewpoints and they were questions, and then we saw how this one related to that. You know, I'm imagining a blue link now between those two ideas. And then when you went directly to, you know, what are the traits of an engaged learner? I'm thinking, okay, now we're getting into characteristics, character points. So it's even helping me as a listener, as I'm listening and learning from you. I can visualize better what that might look like, even if I'm not looking at your specific code. So thank you for sharing that. Is there one more person who would like to share out before we move on?
I mean, we talked about how experience leads to the inquiries. Teaching middle, I brought up how just if you ask the wrong question, it can take you on a different route. So, for instance, the other day I asked AI to create a Muppet, and the difference was a lowercase m versus a capital M. So, like, the question leads to the inquiry. Like, what are you trying? What is it you're trying to seek? And then, based on your experiences, we got to understand our kids don't have a lot of experiences, building upon just what they think they don't know to really show them what they do know.
I love that. So you're again meeting the students where they are, which I think we heard from another group as well. And then also considering what schema do they have. And that just reminds me again of, you know, learning is really that continuum. It is a change point, if you will. We're emerging in our understanding of a concept. And as we get more and more exposure and we have those experiences or we make those mistakes and learn from those mistakes, we're able now to transfer that information to new settings. We can synthesize it. And I can promise you, I've never put baking soda in a cake again after my learning experience. But now it makes me wonder, because I tend to be a change points thinker. Well, why is it so different? Why can't we separate, you know, and substitute one for the other? So it's almost opening up some new inquiry for me. So thank you guys for taking that time to share and talk, because that really leads us even further into our conversation about, you know, how do questions help to frame our thinking as we're thinking about our viewpoints. Our experience and background may not be the same as our students' background. And who gets to decide what engagement looks like, right? For you or for your learners, you know, their viewpoint of what engagement might be is very different based on the answers that we talked about yesterday and the technology and the influx of social media that just makes it, you know, a little more difficult to engage sometimes in the traditional sense. So I always like to ask my students, why ask why? You know, why do we ask why? And even Rory, who says, you know, what's it's because, she is transitioning to the word why now. And it makes me a little sad because I love the what's it's because. And it's because essential questions are so important. And I'm waiting for my screen to catch up a little bit, but we'll keep going. You guys hit the nail on the head. There's so many ways that we can approach a topic, and the point is we want to engage our learners. And so one way to do that as a teacher is to be thinking about, well, where might I start the inquiry? You know, it may not always start with viewpoints, although that is a great place to start. Maybe I'm thinking about the life cycle of a butterfly. And so I may be starting with change points. Maybe we are looking at US history and we're comparing two leaders in the same time period. You know, what made one leader more effective than the other, or who saw it differently? You know, again, bringing in the viewpoints as I'm comparing and contrasting with character points. And so there's that integration that makes it so rich and so powerful.
Might need to use your mouse.
You know, can I jump in, Dawn? Because
Yes. And
I think that one of the things together for me from this conversation and the insights on inquiry and engagement is when students become fluent with NeuroPoints, each one of the NeuroPoints is an inquiry question into itself. And they feel, I think they feel empowered. Often when I was teaching, let's say I'd ask a question, and if students felt reticent about verbalizing their thinking, and second language learners or all learners we can all stumble over our words. And so it creates a safe space for inquiry for all students. And to me, that's also part of the motivation and engagement and intrinsic value of NeuroPoints being able to be internalized by all the students. So yes, you can listen to them as a teacher, and then you can see, just Don, I loved what you said, Don. You could sort of see the NeuroPoints patterns emerging, the code emerging from what people were saying. So it's that visualization that doesn't always need to happen by hand. It can also empower students with a language of cognition. So exciting conversation.
Yes, very exciting. So I always say technology hates me and it's not catching up to me, but I'm going to keep going because the conversation we're having is so rich, and I can always switch cameras if I need to. So as we're thinking about a starting point, we're starting with the end in mind. And so when you're thinking about your content, you're thinking about your standards, you're thinking about, what is the outcome? What is the final assessment going to look like? Then we can start back planning, if you will, backwards design, and think about, well, where would we actually start so that we can support our students? And oftentimes those start with those essential questions, those big questions that can transfer from one content area to another. And so that is always a great place to start a unit, but it may not be as specific as you need it to be as an inquiry point. So for example, one of the questions we had yesterday, which was a big essential question, is why are connections the key to deep understanding? And we talked about how do the 5 NeuroPoint patterns help us accomplish that deep understanding. So the first question is essential, right? How do connections lead to deep understanding? But then my inquiry point focuses us in a little bit more on, let's talk about NeuroPoints now. And then once we have that understanding, we can transfer it to other connections. Connections in relationships, for an example, connections in the workplace, connections in the family or in the home, connections with places, thinking about your destinations that you wanted to visit. You have a connection to that in some way. So how does that deepen your understanding? Well, if you've never been to the beach, you're not going to have the same understanding that someone is going to have who has had that experience. So again, the schema helps us to establish that viewpoint. So one of the things I love, love, love about using NeuroPoints is as I'm thinking of each point, there's some big ideas that naturally kind of jump out for me. So for example, in viewpoints, I'm going to see if Jared, could you possibly share your screen? I'm on slide 23. For some reason, mine won't advance. Let's see if that's better. Are you guys able to see that now? A little better. Okay, perfect. So in thinking about, in this example, viewpoints, there's some big ideas about viewpoints. One of the big ideas is that context influences our interpretation, right? We just talked about that with the beach. Understanding someone else's perspective means that I have to shift my viewpoint. Our viewpoints are also determined by the voices that we choose to listen to, the opinions, the experiences of those around us, our mentors, our family members. All of those things contribute to our viewpoints. Contradicting viewpoints can lead to deeper truths. So as I'm keeping an open mind about viewpoints, my idea may shift. I may have had one thought that now is changed. And so that is part of the viewpoints thinking. So if I'm approaching a content area or a topic or some complex text, especially in expository writing, one of the inquiry points or prompts may be, whose voice is heard in this text and whose voice is missing? So if we're studying the American Revolution and I'm looking at it through the perspective of a colonist, that viewpoint is very different than what it would be for someone in England. And then someone in England today is not going to call our American Revolution the American Revolution. That's a different viewpoint. And so it helps to put yourself in that position to think of things from opposite points of view. So an inquiry point, even just entering into a text, could be, what is the author's perspective? What is the voice of the author? And that's one of the standards that we focus on. Let's look at character points as an example. So here we're thinking about qualities and attributes and characteristics and those traits that can be observable. But we also know some other things about traits and characteristics. The meaning is dependent on my interpretation of it, right? The way I view it. So if my car doesn't start and it has something to do with the engine, I'm going to tell my husband, who's a certified ASE certified mechanic, the car won't start. There's something wrong with the engine. He's going to interpret that differently. What do you mean it won't start? Does it crank? Do the lights come on? Do you have power? Will the radio work? So his interpretation already is different when he's starting to describe what could be the characteristics of an engine that's not working. So if I'm looking at two individuals, if I'm looking at characters in a story, my sample inquiry prompt as a teacher might be, how does a person's actions reveal their traits? How does what we do line up with who we are? And so as you're reading in a novel, those things may become very evident. Part points. Love this one. This is the one that I struggle with the most because I need to remember that part points are specifically for physical objects, a structure that has parts that I can put together and take apart. We think metaphorically often of structures, and I've made this mistake myself. If I'm thinking about the structure of a poem versus the structure of a building, that really is two different thought processes. The structure of the building is physical, so I'm going to have part points. I'm going to have doors and windows and walls and elevators. The structure of a piece of literature or poetry, as an example, its structure is more metaphoric because it's abstract. It's not a physical thing. So that's actually group points. So I go back and forth with part points and group points, and I have to remind myself again that it's about a physical object that has anatomy. So even physical objects that have anatomy, there's big ideas. The form and function of something is dependent on its parts, right? A structure is only as strong as its weakest part. So an inquiry question or an inquiry prompt could be, how does the physical design of something reveal its purpose? And then we can go in and look at the object. So now I've given my learners a reason, if you will, to start thinking in that direction. But like our brains do, we don't
Hey,
stop.
Dawn, can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so one of the questions in the chat from Reza on engineering is how can we incorporate and adapt this to content areas for problem solving? So the chemical reaction, I was thinking, oh yeah, so this is causality and the ripple effects of a reaction, but describing the net force acting on an object. So there you have an object, right, with part points. And then you're looking at the interdependency of what are the causal forces on that, and really then the attributes of those parts. I mean, so that's where it gets, especially as content becomes ever more abstract, very exciting, because then a student understands that we study anatomy, we study physiology, and we study taxonomy, and all of those are key to the sciences. But thank you for that. That's a really nice description of part points. I really got something from that as well.
Well, I'm still wrestling it with myself. I heard Dale say earlier, I'm starting to see it. It's starting to be fluid. But it is, when we're trying to wrap our minds around our own metacognition, we've been thinking so naturally for so long that we don't often stop to think, well, why am I thinking that way? Or what process am I using to think that way? But it really will help us and help our learners if they understand the why behind it. So for example, and I put group points kind of right after part points for that reason. with the group points, we're categorizing, we're classifying, we might be looking at metaphorical structures as an example. We're looking for those relationships. Classification depends on personal meaning and perception, but then we're also looking at how things go together. How do they relate? So for example, if I'm studying, the natural world, my inquiry prompt to help students get started is, how does sorting things help us understand the world better? How does sorting things into groups help us understand it better? And I'm a professional hobbyist. So anytime I jump into a hobby, I love all the stuff that goes with it, and I love to organize it. So I want all the pencils together. I want the erasers together. I want the blending sticks together. I want my sketchbooks over here. I like everything to be in a container in its place because my brain is very much in that compartment mode. I think in that way. So students, we can draw their attention to that and say, well, why are these particular animals the same? Why do we consider these mammals? Why is it that they're sorted together in that way, even though there's some other animals that may share something similar? And so that brings up, again, we could go back to character points. And so it's all so exciting when you see how integrated it is. And then, of course, change points, thinking about how change is inevitable. It's not always apparent. Things change over time. Something that changes has at least one cause and at least one effect. Sometimes one cause can have multiple effects. And so those are the big ideas that we want our students to begin wrestling with, so that when we're talking about mathematics or we're talking about history, we can say, for example, as an inquiry prompt, how could a small move create a big transformation? How could just one small incident create such a huge transformation? And then we're going back to where we are as learners. My small step as a learner is going to transform my understanding. I may be a novice right now, but as I ask questions and I investigate and I'm examining how I process, I'm going to move myself up that continuum. So I'm learning how to apply that information. I'm learning how to synthesize information. I'm learning how to transfer information. So I always go back to, it's not about the apple. It's not about the pencil. It's not about the American Revolution, but it's about the processes and those transferring of essential questions that go beyond the content. That's what we want from our students, because we've got so much information, that cognitive overload we talked about yesterday. The information is out there. We need to be the discerners of that information and decide, the deciders, if you will, what are we going to do with that information? So for me, some of the value, and this is probably part of your repertoire of strategies as well, is I'm always thinking about what could make a strong inquiry point or an inquiry prompt. What is the outcome I'm looking for? So I'm hoping it'll spark curiosity and some discussion, that it opens up the opportunity for multiple viewpoints, that we're looking at evidence-based thinking. Our opinions are great, but what evidence is out there to help support our opinions? How can we make sense of the facts that are out there when the facts are contradictory? How can we anchor our thinking to conceptual understanding and promote student inquiry? So to me, regardless of what your content area is or what grade level you're teaching, or where you are as a learner, you're using all of those processes subconsciously, and NeuroPoints for the first time shows me that I'm in control. I have the power. And even if AI becomes, even more important in our world, or used more in schools, or used more in my job, I'm still in charge. And I'm the one that's going to determine the so what and the now what of that information.
Hey, Dawn, can I jump in? Because I just had a flashback, a really quick flashback, which is Bloom, when he came out with Bloom's taxonomy, he talked about one-shot thinking. There was a lot of research about this, that students had one-shot responses. And a friend of my son's I was talking to him about a controversial issue, and he says, well, I've done the research. and he went online and he downloaded something, you know, and it's because in a lot of ways he didn't have the inquiry tools and the processes and the questions immediately before him. And if he had NeuroPoints and he used it for some years, he's going to say, no, my research is not hitting a button. It's looking for these different connections between points. So I just had a flashback to that one-shot thinking idea. It's even, you know, it's astronomically taken off, I think, in a lot of our students.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought that up, because that's really a nice segue to our second learning outcome today, which is thinking about opportunities for implementation. You know, for me, this has been a paradigm shift, and I've been dabbling in thinking maps for 24 years. I've used other graphic organizers. I've tried mind mapping. I've used Cornell Notes. There's so many different ways I've tried to organize my thinking. But this is the first time that I've had something that is simple enough that it's not going to take me weeks and weeks and weeks to remember that green is go, that's a change. I'm now seeing my thinking in those colors, even as we're talking, I think I mentioned earlier. And so when you're looking at your curriculum and as you're using NeuroPoints more and more, you're going to see those natural connections. So Jared, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. If you're able to see where I am on slide 31, we're looking at curriculum connections. So take a moment to look at that and see what resonates with your thinking about how you plan for instruction now. What instructional frameworks are you using in the classroom? Is there anything on there that really jumps out?
For me, the change points, the green is what really stands out. So the idea of really following from a lesson planning perspective, the idea of internalizing the standard and then identifying the thinking process and then bringing in the NeuroPoints, your starting point, developing an inquiry, supporting student learning, inquiry rather. That really kind of struck me as it's woven straight through the middle of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks.
Anything else that stood out to you? And I'm wondering if you're noticing, we talked earlier about viewpoints and how we could link those outside of some of our other thinking. And I've noticed that in this particular case, we're thinking about metacognition, the role of metacognition, and then open-minded disposition. So how do we create that in the classroom where students can disagree agreeably? So I'm already thinking about another question there. So in thinking ahead, for an example, I'm going to go to the idea of inferring, because regardless of what content area we're teaching, inferring or jumping to those conclusions is an important part of what we do. And what I've seen a lot of times in the classroom as an administrator, and I know I'm guilty of this as a teacher as well, is that I have said before, and I've heard people say, okay, read this text and answer the questions using text evidence. Okay, what does that mean? Again, we do that subconsciously, but we haven't always taught our students how to do that. So if I were looking at it, for example, through a first grader's lens, and they're reading a book with characters in it, they're inferring at that level is mostly about feelings. And wouldn't it be nice if 6-year-olds could recognize someone else's feelings and not just their own? That's a powerful connection. And so teaching them how to do that with text then can transfer. So maybe the inquiry prompt for that one could be, why did the character do this or say that? How does that show how they feel? When the character took the ball away, how do you think that made the other character feel? So now we're developing empathy, right? Which is powerful. So inferring can be looked through character points. We can also look at inferring through change points. How did the character change as a result of their decisions? That is inferring again. I have to make an inference about that. If I go up a few grade levels, let's just think about 7th grade as an example. and I need to understand how to make a claim and support that with evidence and reasoning. Now I'm back to viewpoints. How does perspective affect my thinking about this topic? What perspective is evident? What perspective is missing? Because if I'm making a claim, I need to think about both. And then maybe even thinking about writing at even a higher level English too. You may have a combination because now the thinking is becoming more complex. What patterns or contradictions emerge across genres? Wow, that's loaded, right? So that could be viewpoints, character points, change points, group points, also looking at part points when I'm thinking about settings or different genres. You know, there's definitely lots of opportunities for great discussion, but because there's only 5 processes that my brain is really using behind the scenes, I'm now taking control and owning that autonomy piece that we talked about. And so we can think about that through the variety of starting points. If we're looking at author's point of view and context clues, I'm thinking blue, viewpoints. If I'm sequencing a plot, analyzing a plot, looking at a cycle, I'm thinking change points might be a good place to enter into that. If I'm looking at main idea and details, group points jumps out at me. Cause and effect, back to change points. Comparing 2 characters or 2 events, character points. Analyzing the strength of a structure, that's back to part points. Okay, so neuropoints for me, and I'm going to skip down to slide 37, Jared, is that when I think about all of the amazing instructional models that are out there, neuropoints is there. It's been invisible. The thinking that we've been talking about has been invisible in that framework. But now we're giving our students and ourselves the power to say, all right, if I'm using the C3 framework in social studies, I'm really examining primary sources. I'm really looking at bias. I've got some big viewpoints going on there. If I'm using the 5E model for science, then I'm doing a lot of exploration and engaging and experimenting. Okay, what's happening? Okay, I'm visualizing change points. Project-based learning. The students are creating a plan, they're connecting it to a real world problem. There's a lot to consider when they're creating that final product. The inquiry model, obviously, and then, you know, thinking about all of the other research-based instructional strategies that are out there. You can find now, as you're looking at text, as you're looking at your lesson plans, I have found myself seeing the colors as I'm reading, because complex text is loaded with multiple structures and multiple patterns, which is why comprehension often hits the wall, as Dr. Hirely says. It's like playing chess. You might know what the individual chess pieces can do on their own, but when you put the whole game of chess together with an opponent, it can become very complicated very quickly. So I'm just curious to see now what is spinning around, what questions are lingering as we're talking a little bit more about how this might connect to content.
In my current role, I don't have mandated set of content. So one of the advantages that provides me, not only looking at how I'm going to use this to plan for my classes, but also I think naturally, as people have explained what they gravitate towards, oh, usually I start with blue and then I go to green, or then first I usually go to green. I think one of the things that this has really made me reflect on is a lot of my students have self-guided plans or passion projects. And one of the things I could see would be very beneficial is that all 5 are important. And if you're naturally drawn to be very blue and purple oriented, this kind of really pulls out those other aspects that might not come naturally to us that are also incredibly important. And instead of Carrie having to facilitate that, I think the structure of NeuroPoints once taught to students just leads itself to that autonomy for the student to really say, how am I going to tackle the brown? I noticed that my own coding really is lacking brown and red. I'm not looking at the anatomy as much as I could, or the group points as much, and kind of try to dig into that themselves, which I really, really love about this. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. And it reminded me, Jared, if you'll skip down to slide 40, Carrie, what you just said fits beautifully with, again, the prompting and the guiding and the leading that we want to do as facilitators of learning. And so some of the questions that I ask myself and that I can ask my students is, tell me about your thinking. You know, what's worth noticing now in your code? What really stands out to you? Or where did you find yourself spending some more time? How did you organize your thinking? Where did you start? Where did it lead? What did you let go of that maybe at first you thought was an important viewpoint, but now you're realizing, okay, I'm not really as focused on that now. Now my focus is over here. How did you analyze the information that you were accessing? How did you evaluate it as a learner? How did you question the authority of whatever text you're using, especially if you're using AI? Did you triangulate that information to make sure that the facts are accurate? Why is this important? You know, going back to, you know, we can revisit viewpoints at any time during our processing. Why is this important? Now what? You know, so what, now what kind of a thing? And how can I apply what I've learned in this context with this neurocode into a different situation? How can I synthesize it? So I could see it leading very nicely into rich conversations between learners, between teacher and learner, as well as giving students an opportunity to say, what I have to think is important. Look at all this thinking I did. That is important. So like on the next slide, I have an example of one of my early attempts at Neurocode and using NeuroPoints to think about Johnny Appleseed. And it looks like my screen finally caught up. So when I look back at this particular one, I noticed something very different in my thinking that I haven't done in a long time. I immediately looked at my character points, and for the first time in my thinking, when I'm visually mapping it, I did a comparison and contrast where I had some commonalities between who Johnny Appleseed, the tall tale, is and who Johnny Chapman is, the real deal, who it's based on. And then I noticed I had two different change points. The timelines for each were different. There was a little overlap, but there's some difference. So then it brought me to thinking about, well, what's the difference between a folktale and biography? And how valuable is that when we're talking about our history? You know, did George Washington really chop down that cherry tree? You know, you can really start uncovering some of those myths and those truths that we've believed for so long that may not be, you know, totally based in fact. So I think there's a lot of power when we're talking about NeuroPoints. So to kind of wrap us up before we get to our Q&A section, I just wanted to share one little slide with you about AI, because I've been using AI in my own thinking and my own work, and I have seen where it can benefit my thinking and where it can constrain my thinking and where I can be misled in my thinking. And so for me, when I'm talking about using AI in the classroom, and I talk about this with my resident teachers that I work with, it's how are you using AI? Are you using it to generate ideas? Are you trying to clarify a concept that you're wrestling with? Are you asking to refine your work? Are you challenging your ideas or synthesizing ideas? Are you using AI for feedback so you can evaluate and maybe go deeper in your thinking? And regardless of how I'm using AI, if I'm using NeuroPoints, I'm still doing the hard lifting. I'm still the HI, the human intelligence behind that particular tool. And so that is powerful. And it also will eliminate a lot of that plagiarizing that we see happening, where I'm just going to copy and paste what ChatGPT told me, and I'm going to turn that in. Because then the focus is on a right answer. I satisfied my teacher. I'm going to get a good grade. instead of focusing on what is my thinking here? How has my thinking changed? How did I come to that understanding or conclusion? So with that, I'd like to open the floor for Dr. Hirely and our participants here. I know you probably have some unanswered burning questions. We have about 10 minutes. What are some things that you would like to ask Dr. Hirely now, where you are in your thinking, your viewpoints?
Or Jenny, any general question that pops up that any of us can address.
I had a question. I know part of the work and opening statements yesterday was about how we can create a more equitable learning environment for a range of learners. How might we need to scaffold or introduce the use of NeuroPoints with maybe the developing learner? Because some of the examples, Don, you shared are advanced, and they're polished. But how might we need to think about utilizing NeuroPoints for someone, a student that might be earlier in their developmental journey?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think one of the keys is, as Dawn has mentioned, the idea of always starting with a blank canvas, so that side by side, a teacher with a student, if it's in a special circumstance or in a group of students, is then mediating the students' thinking from a blank canvas. And that means it doesn't get overly complex. It only gets overly complex as the student is growing their and developing their ideas on the canvas. So it isn't a matter of starting with the complex, it's starting with the simple view. The other thing is that and this happens with thinking maps as well, but I think with NeuroPoints, there's greater interdependence of the ideas, is that oftentimes when we think about, let's call it remedial education, what we're mediating by and large is the content. We haven't had a language for really mediating the thinking in a way that the students develop fluency. So with a developing learner at any age, I've had experiences working very deeply with a school that was a private school outside of Boston that supported 50 school districts in the surrounding areas that had trouble with the students because of language issues. I worked with them deeply, and they had promoted the idea that they focused on cognitive development. And then after about 3 months, the principal of the school said, "We haven't been doing that at all. We've been just focusing on the content." So I think what it is spending some time closer in and is introducing all the students, whether it's one-on-one instruction or in a group or in a whole classroom, getting the basic primitives down and the definitions and the cognitive language, and then mediation happens quite quickly. And it really, I mean, I mentioned this, the whole idea of students who have not been able to develop their writing skills or have not been able to develop the language skills, let's say if it's English primary. Well, what they can show is their thinking. And so there's the mediation of the thinking that's happening, but it needs to start with a blank canvas. So there isn't an overwhelming sense of, oh my gosh, I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
They build it. They build the maps.
Right. And just to piggyback on that, thinking about gradual release, and we talk about this in the training guide with some examples in there. I think about, for my example, Tacky the Penguin, very simple book where the author says that Tacky is an odd bird. Well, if I'm doing a read aloud, what a great opportunity for me to use the language of NeuroPoints as I'm reading and going, wow, did you notice that? The author said he's an odd bird. That's a character point. I'm wondering what evidence we can find to support that. And then we can continue reading. So you can model it through read alouds, through gradual release. I've even thought about with some of the younger students using pictures that they could physically move around as they're building their code. Sticky dots work really great if you're having trouble with them with the fine motor skills. But again, because it's a dot and it's a link, and it's just the 5 colors, you can make it as simple or as complex as you would like it to be. But it's making that thinking visible in that moment. When the student shares an idea, that's an interesting viewpoint. Let's put that down in blue. Let's put that point down on our code. And so all of those great scaffolds that you would do for any learner that needs it, you still use those scaffolds. So I love what Carolyn Tomlinson said, is that we're planning for a high ceiling and a low floor. So if I'm teaching from generalizations and essential questions and big ideas that transfer, I can scaffold that down with vocabulary word banks. I can use picture splashes. I can help them with other, tools like graphic organizers, with thinking maps. Those things are still valuable. They're still tools I can use to scaffold my thinking. But as you'll see, as you start using NeuroPoints more and more, creating your own neurocode, you will notice that it becomes more natural. And kids tend to pick up on these things a little faster than we do. Some of us older ones with mature brains. So thank you for that question.
I'd also like to jump in on what Carrie mentioned earlier about diversifying the thinking. I thought that was talk about an essential insight, in that what happens is, especially when we're mediating students' thinking, it becomes really pretty clear that most of us as human beings have certain cognitive styles that we just love. Some of us are highly sequential. So you see a student starting to use change points everywhere, or another student says, "Oh no, I group things," and so they're using group points the whole time, or they're so highly associative and creative that everything's a viewpoint. So what happens is, and it's embedded. I like Jay McTighe's concept of theory embedded models. The embedded theory of NeuroPoints is that we need to diversify and present and diversify and give tools for each one of these fundamental processes, because as Don was talking about, they're embedded in any text. They're all working in any text. So that point that Carrie made is, yes, a student might be great at sequencing. Guess what? That actually can sort of over time really prevent the student from growing in seeing the diversity of processes and be able to apply them and adapt and be able to transfer across disciplines. That's the other key thing that you'll see in the guide. We have big picture, just like Dawn has shown some big picture examples for each major discipline, in how the content language, the academic language in each discipline is represented using NeuroPoints. So these questions are really key.
Mm-hmm. We still have time. Is there someone else that has a unanswered question, a burning question, a thought to contribute?
I had just put in the chat, I've been reading a lot about, AI and responsible use with students, and how, at the end of the day, AI is great to come up with that final product, right? So how we need as teachers to shift our viewpoint to look more process versus product. And I love that this really, hones in on that, and not only just the idea of the process, but the thinking process itself, and having the students map that out for us. So that's just a great reflection tool for them. It's a great way to just change our thinking about teaching and how we're going to help students. Again, I think the next big challenge, at least in our district, and there's 5 of us here from Bridgeport, this idea of what does AI use look like for the teacher, and what does AI use look like for the student? Because our district specifically, you know, we don't want to leave our students behind. They're going to have to learn how to use this. We can't just put our heads in the sand. Showing them, okay, how can I use AI as that tool, as that thought partner? We're a Microsoft district, and one of the cool things I heard was when they designed their AI, you know, Copilot, they called it Copilot, not autopilot, right? It's the idea to work side by side and not instead of. So I just really like this idea of mapping out the students' thinking and really clearly seeing that.
Can I just add something to that real quick? Some
Mhm.
context to all of this. You may have noticed that we've used the word code all throughout these 2 days of training. And that's very intentional because the workforce is operating and pushing more towards AI specifically. AI has actually hit a plateau where all of the data that has been processed already, it can no longer really grow and get smarter per se without additional input from human intelligence. And so the preparation here with NeuroPoints and specifically referring to the code that is being created will be the driver for the future. When students are learning how to code with NeuroPoints, they are learning the fundamental life skill of critical thinking that will allow them to ultimately succeed in an AI world.
Mhm.
Well put.
Great point.
Hey, Don, another thing that resonates with me is this statement that I've heard said many times, and that is for far too long, our schools have been places where young people, let me start it over, where the old people go to see, young people go to see the old people work, or something like that. The old people are doing the work. The young people aren't doing the work. There, I got it right. And so I was thinking about the shift from pedagogy to hudagogy, this whole idea of this teacher-centric model versus a learner-centric model. And we've talked a lot about that. I think we've given it lip service for years. I've been in this business for 40 years, so I've been hearing it for a long time, but have we really made the shift? And I want to echo what David said in calling out Carrie's point, because Carrie, that point really struck me hard when you shared it, because for me, what you identified was really a way in which to facilitate that shift to learner autonomy and agency by the learner being able to just look visually and say, so what colors am I not using as much, or what ones am I using most frequently? So just in and of that, that simple tool, that visual mindset has helped that student to really own their own learning. And we don't necessarily have to do as much prompting for, well, can you think of that another way? What's another way we could look at that? It's right there in front of them. So I think that's so powerful. And to piggyback on that is what you talked about, Don, recently when we were planning for these training days. And that was you handed me a piece of expository text. And you said, Kevin, read this text. And here are your 5 colors and start underlining based on what cognitive processes you see coming to the surface as you're reading through this text. And I thought, how powerful is that to be able to see that visually? I know we used to talk about that even with the maps, about what map you see, but the power of the color to just go through, instead of just randomly highlighting with a yellow or a pink highlighter, but to go through those colors and then to take it off that text and use that to build my neurocode. Wow, that is so powerful. So
Mhm. Thank you all for that sharing. I think we have time for one more before we wrap up.
Just real quick. So I put in the chat the link you guys gave it for our June meeting. There's an article that David wrote for that AI article,
Mhm.
and that was in June. It didn't make much sense, but now in August, I think I'm starting to get it a little bit. So thank you.
I love that.
Yeah, hey, we're all getting it. You know, it's one of we've been working on this for many, many years. And when I just want to give a shout out to Jared, his work, because simultaneously we're building out the software that will then be a real complement to what we need to do by hand as well. So we're any of your insights, everybody's insights are really helpful. What about this? Questions, skepticism. Hey, how would this work here? All of these are really key to us moving forward.
Yeah,
Mhm.
So
just for the
thank you,
record,
Mario.
the 62-year-old brain of mine is still working with neuroplasticity, so it's going to take me a little bit of time, but I'll get it, but I'll get it done by October 4th. That's my goal.
Ah, look at that.
Hey, well, I'm 69 going on 70, so this is keeping me humming.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you on that. Well, thank you all for sharing. I'm gonna let Kevin kind of take it from here and wrap us up. We've got a few items for you, so I'm gonna let him go from here.
Thank you, Don. Well, I just want to say thank you again to everybody. Hey, Mario, who do we have here?
Who do we have here? Who is this?
Mario, who's joining us as we wrap things up here?
This is the quantum learner in 2050. She'll be the NeuroPoint queen right here.
Awesome.
I love it. I love it.
Well, welcome. So thank you all so much for your time, energy, your thought, your creativity, the questions. So we are 2/3 of the way complete with the training, and we'll come back together on the 24th of September. We wanted to give you the time to digest, to think through, to do a little practicing, to talk with others about NeuroPoint so that you can begin to internalize it more yourself. So be sure to mark that date. I will send you a reminder. I promise not to send you 4 or 5 reminders. I will send you one reminder for September 24th with the link, and we'll meet at the same time. So Don, if you could advance the slide. Here we are. All right, so Don has designed a challenge for you. So a challenge to become. We're going to get on the path that leads to NeuroPoint fluency. So you're going to create a neurocode for at least 3 different topics. So first of all, your personal topic may be a hobby, a passion, a life goal. A professional topic could relate to your current role, leadership question, or a school-wide focus. I'm sure you have plenty of those. Your educational topic might be a lesson, a unit, a standard, or a student that you're planning, a student need that you're planning for. And we're asking that you bring at least one example of your coded thinking with you to day 3 on September 24th. It can be paper, digital, or even photos of a sketch. And we'll explore how to refine, apply, and share these in your own learning spaces. I'll do a follow-up to today's session and include that assignment again, so you'll have it there in front of you. Don?
Okay, so our Padlet is working. And again, I want to thank you all for sharing this exciting time with us. I've loved interacting and hearing your questions, and it's really challenged my thinking since I've started exploring with NeuroPoints. I'm still questioning, I'm still challenging and confirming. And so that is part of the process. And I love that you guys are jumping in to join us in that. So in the Padlet today, just a real quick exit ticket, if you will. What is squaring with your thinking so far now that we've had 2 days together in kind of a square, if you will? Thinking in a triangular shape, how is my thinking moving in a new direction? So there's our change points. And then what idea is still circling around in your mind? So there's some viewpoints there. So if you would take a moment before we leave today or after, if you want to go ahead and scan that, answer one question or all 3 if you would like, but we'd just like to know kind of where you are in your thinking about NeuroPoints at this point. And then Kevin, I think you have a link.
For this one.
Let's see if it'll move to the next slide. I'll let you start. There it goes. Talking about our appreciate the exit survey as well.
All right. So you should see the link now in chat for the exit poll. This is the feedback form. You received one yesterday. Most people completed it. And as I said, we reviewed it and made adjustments based on your feedback. So thank you for taking the time to do that. We ask that you do it again. So this is a slightly different feedback form. We're asking some different questions than we did yesterday to help shape part 3 of the training and just to make sure it's as meaningful and purposeful as possible for all of you. So again, we just thank you so much. And one of the things that we are planning to do is to conduct office hours, and Don can talk a little bit more about that, but just as a way to stay connected over the next several weeks before we reconvene on September 24th. So Don, do you want to share a little bit more about that?
Yes, I'm super excited. So we're going to be setting up some Zoom opportunities, some virtual office hours. So as you are developing your thinking and you're looking at your NeuroPoints and your code, you can choose to come on for a very informal time. It will not be a formal session, but it'll just be a time for you to ask questions, bring examples. We can look at some curriculum that you have, just to kind of help you wrap your mind around this a little bit more. As you're still learning yourself and being that, putting yourself in the place of that learner. So we'll be sending out some links. We're hoping to do at least one a week, and that way that'll keep you in the loop. And again, it's optional. You can come to one, none, or all if you would like, just to get some more information so we can keep you on track. All
Yeah,
right.
I just want to say thank you, Dawn, for a splendid and rich couple of days here. I just your insights range widely, and I think everybody appreciates the depth and what you bring to it and your enthusiasm. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate that as well. And so we're going to leave you with this thought. If we want students to become thoughtful, independent, and creative problem solvers, we must teach them to value questions as much as answers. So keep asking those questions, keep pursuing that inquiry, and just know that we are here to support you along the way. So thank you all for being here. I will stay for a few minutes if there's some individual questions you'd like to answer, but otherwise we will see you on September 24th.
Take care, all. Bye-bye.
Y'all.
Dawn,
Bye.
a quick question. Will we still have access to the file that was uploaded to NeuroPoints?
Yes, you will. And we may be adding some additional items into that portal as well. So so you can check back anything, for example, that takes place within your office hours. Should you choose to do that with Dawn, could arguably be uploaded into that as well as a reference point for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you, everyone, for this. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Love it.
Thank you, Teresa.
All right.
Thank
Have a good
you.
one. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Take
so
care,
much.
Carrie, Teresa. Thanks
I
so
really
much.
wish we could stay on. This has been really awesome. Dawn, you are absolutely amazing. I would love to take one of your classes just as a teacher. You did so many wonderful things throughout the past couple of days. I'm like, I know why you were picked to run this session. Let me tell you.
Well, I'm thinking I need to come see you and get some donuts and cider.
Well, we will convince you that New England is a place to be for that. Like my jaw was still on the floor about Michigan outdoing New England on that.
All right. I'm willing to let my viewpoint be changed. So
Love it.
I do have to get going. I'm about to jump in the car and drive out to Wisconsin, but I appreciate all of you and thank you for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thanks.
Hey,
Thank you
Carrie,
so
safe
much, Carrie.
travels.
Safe.
I said I'm off to go pack up. I have 12 hours though until I'm leaving. So,
All
all
right.
right. Have a good one, everybody.
Thanks,
Take
Teresa.
care.
Bye.